There were questions about what is the matrix, what does it mean to exit it, and what is the birth. And today, I feel like approaching this topic and really understand how it all works. Because there was also a question about the levels of consciousness, and some people even experience certain states but don't know how to proceed further. They're asking for some advice, some guidance. I'd really like to talk about this. I'd be glad to answer your questions if you write them down somewhere. I might be able to answer them for you in the middle of our session, let's say, and definitely at the very end. Okay. Well, perhaps we could do a little bit of drawing to understand exactly who am I when we begin to answer this question. Because what have we came across, even in the chat, right, about when there are debates about enlightenment, there is some I that starts trying to prove its own correctness. And then we're already playing the game of who is more enlightened, who knows more about it, or something like that. So there's a particular I personality, which essentially is no longer the authentic I that we truly are, the one we were in the womb. And then, after birth, what exactly happens? Look, a very sweet baby comes into this world. We all know about it. Everyone is naturally drawn to it. Every child, when enters this world, emits a great deal of light because it was very recently immersed in those, shall we say, subtle energies, the energies of consciousness within that oasis. And it introduces this light into the world simply by being born. Yes, we know that for a certain period, a baby's fontanelle does not fully close. This means the energy, or rather from the Sahasrara, speaking in the language of Hinduism or our crown chakra, continues to transmit that energy here, and we can sense this light coming from the child. That's why we dedicate so much attention to it. People even want to come and see and touch. Well, you all know this. So, well, let's say when a child is born, what happens in their perception of the world, in their picture of the world? Let's try to show this somehow. Maybe it will be clear. If not, you can ask some clarifying questions. Well, let's say we'll draw, let's call it the creation of any person, the creation of a child, right? Who, let's say, begins to perceive this world. Well, something like this. I'll draw a little person here so it's clearer for us, right? As if it's a little person just like us. But in reality, that's not the case. Because at the very beginning, a child exists in a state of pure consciousness and pure perception. He is the living perception itself, the living field, right? That is so often talked about. Meaning it's from there that he begins to perceive this world. And for us, it's easier when a person is growing older and going through life as years pass. It's more convenient for us to see it as some kind of linear process, right? Suggesting there's a past and a future. And for instance, a consciousness that has just arrived in this world, he has manifested his creation, and this consciousness starts to experience this world. It looks at this world and it sees it with pure clarity, free from any filters, without any concepts, and completely without any false beliefs. And we all know, right, that even scientists have proven that at least 95% of us is made up of false beliefs, concepts, stereotypes, various fears, and doubts. Well, that means our free will is very minimal. But when a child arrives, he isn't. He's fearless. He sees this world. The only thing is, as we remember, that a child is fussy because the dense world, for him, let's say, is not exactly, let's say, favorable for him initially, because he came from a different environment, and even more so from a subtly material plane before that, right? So he is how perceiving this world. And the initial individuals who begin to give labels or particular concepts to this child are naturally our beloved parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. Then there's school, university, work, and mass media, and that's how people fall asleep. So a sort of cocoon forms around us, right? And in our creation, well, the first ones appear. You could illustrate that the initial influences, of course, are mom and dad. Mom and dad who tell us the proper way to do things. So just to understand, each one of you has either seen this or recalls it from experience or observed while interacting with small children. Because small children talk about themselves in the third person, right? They, say something like, where did Sasha go, for example, right? And the child says about himself, Sasha went there, right? That is that they do not yet identify themselves with this physical body, this form. They do not identify themselves with this name, right? For a certain period. However, our entire social, so to speak, university swiftly molds us, causing us to forget our origin in this world. But initially, we bring the light into it, after our creation, as it were, takes shape. So let's consider it a small bubble, right, within the space. So thought, this bubble, it is formed within the space of, let's say, the absolute, right, or within this field. So, in other words, it simply is the thought about that I exist, I have manifested, I am present in this space, wouldn't you agree? And this thought, in its living perception, is not yet fully formed until these filters, for example, in our body form, our hands, our feet, we begin to see it and get used to it. And of course, formed personalities, right, that start to form. This personality is these roles we have to play. Sergey talked a lot about this yesterday, and he shared his own examples. For those who missed yesterday's broadcast, we highly recommend it, so that there's a good correlation and clear understanding there. The personality flourishes through the accumulation of various experiences, specific concepts, various fears, certain programs, and some beliefs. They create some filter, a particular concept, a prism through which we start perceiving our own creation. And all the individuals we meet, and with them, we come to experience certain life events, yes, linearly, if we are moving from past to future. It is a truly fascinating process in which we found ourselves, well, we are where we are. Now we're confronted with the question of who I truly am. If we look at this point, who is perceiving everything? We've gathered not just to talk about awakening, but how to begin to align ourselves with it. To understand what is awakening, about what comes after, how to reach it, and how to get there faster. In other words, this is spiritual realization. In other words, if I were to call myself as if I am this spirit, right, that arrived in this world. Well, one might later say our spirit evolved into a personality because it developed into one, because our perception of ourselves shifted somewhat, right? We began to play specific roles, whether that's the stern father or the kind father, the mother, and all the various societal roles that we have. So it is this very thing that creates this unique prism of perception. And it happens that we've become so deeply intertwined with these roles that we are convinced that we truly are them, that we don't know how to detach ourselves. The simplest example, I suppose, is one I like to give. When you've bought a nice, beautiful car and then traveled to your relatives to show it. You come out with your family and say, just look how cool it is. But then you see that the kids have already been playing and have scratched it with a nail. At that moment, your personality hurts because how can this be? This is my car. Here begins the suffering. Yes, what Buddha once spoke about. Yes, that is the first of the noble truths, is to identify suffering. Yes, to find the cause of suffering, and then to learn that there is a path to freedom from suffering. Right? So there it is. And all this happens in our creation. But so that we understand, we interact with different people throughout life, and that's why our creations are all different. Someone here has another one. That is when someone has a thought. A little bubble appears, one then another. And these people, for example, those who perceive the world in the same manner, each possess their own unique story. Someone become outstanding musicians, someone becomes successful businessmen. Let's draw a musician, right? And another person becomes a businessman. This means that each of us, in our own linear space, gains a specific and distinct experience. But then again, we've gathered here to address the question, to answer the question to who I am and why I've come into this world. And so the search begins. Yes, the quest is set in motion. This is undoubtedly the most vital aspect. If I have genuinely asked this question to myself, an inner search begins, and I find myself following its guidance, and the search usually leads down a particular path. Well, we can even, let's make a note of it somewhere that there's this search. And there is a path that you discover sooner or later. For sure, there must be something significant between the search and stepping on the path, and that is the goal. When you start searching, what exactly are we looking for? We're looking for this realization, this source, this oasis, right? We want changes. We are looking for, well, some people call it God, the Tao. Yes, the Absolute. So we start searching for it. This is the spiritual search, right? Therefore, the goal we are moving towards must be defined. The goal we are heading for in life, yes? And naturally, this is reinforced by an inner desire, which must be all-consuming and deeply internal. And you know, as someone said it very well, you should seek enlightenment with the same urgency as if your hair were on fire, desperately needing to find water to extinguish the flames. And it is truly like this. If we truly desire realization, then deep within, we must make the decision to genuinely pursue it. This isn't something one can achieve casually. If we're talking about awakening, it's not something you do it just to join in, like I'm doing my own things, and by the way, I'll awaken while I'm at it. It doesn't happen that way. Well, in extraordinary situations, which we may recall individually from history, when people faced the brink of, let's say, life and death situations, they spontaneously had awakenings experiences. They, of course, sometimes could see the truth, and their whole lives were transformed. Yes, it happens. But overall, if we are speaking about who is observing and comprehending this world, as long as we view through the filter of perception and exist in a state of separation from our space and from other individuals, regrettably, we've evolved like this, that there's me, and then there are neighbors, there's me, and then there are certain individuals, certain nations, certain things. And the I personality in self-defense consistently finds itself in conflict. Wouldn't you agree? This means it appropriates everything for itself and exists consumer state, not for the benefit of this world, but purely for its own gain. But yesterday, Sergey talked about one very interesting tool that is considered the best one. It can be made even stronger, yet it's still regarded as the best. This is a tool of service that enables me to detach from this I personality, because I begin to live in such a way that is no longer for this individual I, but rather to bring energy into the world. But if we are talking about positive energy, about love, joy, gratitude, about those qualities that we actually have inside of our source, then we need to learn to transmit these qualities to others. To learn to interact with life by different rules, by the principle of giving. And by the way, I should say that this is truly the highest degree of enjoyment because, for example, stars are continuously shining. Take the sun, for instance. It's constant service, and the star's consciousness enjoys the fact that it is constantly shining. In essence, when we talk about holy individuals, about those who are enlightened, who left a significant mark on religious history, serious religious figures, truly saints, they were precisely occupied with transmitting this light, meaning they helped people and served the world. Therefore, the principle of realization is the quickest and most effective instrument available. It is, of course, service in order to remember who we really are. So, in actuality, there's an even quicker instrument that significantly accelerates this process, and that instrument is team service. And there was exactly that kind of question in the chat about whether a team is needed or if a teacher is required. And someone even gave the example of Buddha, which is very interesting, that Buddha, in the chat, right, that Buddha studied with various teachers and at the end went beneath a banyan tree where he found enlightenment. Well, first off, in those times, there were quite different requirements. And it was not simple. The real knowledge has been lost, you see. And for some time, the world was in a state of ignorance, right? Well, if we're speaking of those, let's say, parts of the world, right, the East. And Buddha had a great thirst for knowledge, learning diligently from his teachers. He just kept striving for that due realization. However, for those unaware, Buddha indeed established schools in his legacy, proclaiming that complete realization was only attainable through the principles of Dharma, Buddha, and Sangha. In this context, Buddha signifies the teacher, and Sangha is like a community or team, and Dharma represents the methodology or knowledge, a living wisdom transferred from heart to heart. Thus, realization can be achieved through this principle. And you know, many people might argue with that. For instance, there's a highly popular movement right now called Neo-Advaita, where people say no. There are examples of great teachers who independently walk this path of realization. But if you truly look into the origins of how this came to be, one of the most renowned and great teachers, such as Ramana Maharshi, simply surrendered himself to Shiva, who, in his own time, took on a form, yes, through the motherhood of the Arunachala mountain, and Ramana Maharshi spent his entire life in this ascetic practice, transmitting knowledge and creating this Sangha around himself. Indeed, his disciples, throughout his entire life for many decades, adhered to this very principle of succession. That's precisely how it operates. Even if you take Nisargadatta Maharaj, who is one of the well-known Advaitic figures, he also experienced these profound insights through the lineage of his teachers in precisely the same manner. Well, if we're speaking about the general teaching system, about the way this knowledge was conveyed, and that a methodology was present in all nations, across all traditions, and through every generation, that there is only one methodology, and that there is only one path, we can then explore any tradition, regardless of whether it's a juridical type of Raja Yoga or Kriya Yoga, where the continuity of teachers' lineage has been clearly observed for an extended period, right? Sometimes even more than a millennium. And of course, you can also consider any Eastern teachings, including Chinese ones. The principle is always the same. It's just that to truly learn, for example, boxing or swimming, I naturally need to approach a coach who knows how to do it well, or for example, a master of sports, let's say, who has achieved certain results, is different from a coach because a coach knows how to train someone. So, to devalue any teacher on the path in any way is, well, it's simply impossible because they are truly that beacon, that tuning fork, which provides the energy. Well, if it's truly a teacher who has fully realized this power and is ready to transmit this knowledge. Therefore, this represents an important stage, much like these three aspects that I have already talked about. Buddha, a specific stage in the path of development. And you know, I also recently read an interesting book, and there was a famous Lama, a Rinpoche. I just can't recall her name at the moment. It completely slipped my mind. She also reached the spiritual realization. In Tibet, right? She wrote insights on the profound importance and immense value of a team knowledge transfer and how incredibly fortunate we are to have materialized in this physical form, right? And explains how this unfolded in India, right? That how fortunate they were to have been born in an era when Buddha was present and left his knowledge. Well, that is to say, it was over 2,500 years ago, and how fortunate it is to have the opportunity to realize oneself through this knowledge now. And, well, we are so lucky to have a teacher as well, and we have the opportunity to learn from him and transmit this living knowledge in the line of succession. And she gave an excellent example, stating that it's quite rare to meet a teacher or a guru along your life's path. It is such a profound happiness and truly a rare occurrence that, just imagine a turtle diving into the depths of up to 2,000 meters, indeed, within the vast ocean. And you can go to the ocean right now, take a small ring like this, and simply throw it anywhere into the ocean. The probability of a turtle surfacing from the ocean floor and fitting its head through that ring is the exact same as the likelihood of meeting a true teacher on your life's journey. Although, in truth, we always come for exactly this reason. Such an interesting metaphor. Well, let's talk a little bit about... let's return to our perception, to the true essence of creation and what can we do with it. Yesterday, Sergei very well told us about the concept that in one's creation, or to put it simply, we sometimes use the metaphor of an egg. And just so you understand, this is a kind of Vedic cosmogony in many countries around the world. And in India, as well as in China, and among the Slavic peoples, there was a shared understanding that the world, the universe, is like an egg. And this very concept speaks directly about our matrix. Well, if you take this example with our thought that I exist, I am spinning here in this samsara, then, in principle, that is our egg. And the task within this egg, yes, if we compare it to, say, with a chick, yes, that forms from an embryo and consumes the yolk and fully all of its contents, mastering, yes, this space again and again, after which it emerges through the shell into a new, its real world. And similar principle could be applied to us in our space. There are even such drawings from Dali, well, like the birth of a human from an egg. In the same way, there is some knowledge that a person is like someone who is twice born. Yes, there are such terms and such understandings. This means that, in essence, this is precisely the reason why we came here. So now the question is, how do we accomplish this? How do we begin to master this inner space, stop constantly playing roles and perceiving the world through them? For that, a specific methodology is required. Yes, of course, we can somehow through inquiries, some Advaitic concepts, right, and certain practical applications reach a specific level, right? And indeed, when we awaken and these boundaries begin to disappear, these perception filters begin to vanish, filters that make me believe that I am this body, right? That I'm not only this body, that I no longer get caught up in this mind or personality, and I stop defending it. Essentially, all boundaries begin to erase. So this is the path toward awakening, toward enlightenment, right? And we stop seeing this world through that lens and begin to increasingly feel that it is truly an extension of us. Similarly, by analogy, just as we started with the baby who knows nothing beyond itself, it's the same with an egg, right? When we begin to master this space, the question becomes, how do we accomplish that? That is to fill it with our energy, to fill it with our love and life. By the way, for those who've read Castaneda, perhaps you've been interested in this, the nagual, this living emptiness, and the tonal, that is, that everything is manifested, right? In fact, what are these people we meet, or these little houses we build? Well, so you understand that this is, in principle, a figment of our imagination. So, consciousness registers certain occurrences, vibrations in the space, right, within this general field in which we all reside. Fluctuations in the space, some of them are more dense, some are vibrationally more subtle, right? And we access these real worlds by transforming ourselves precisely by seeing the increasingly subtle material foundation of all this. This means that these worlds are essentially created by revealing their nature. Essentially, we remember ourselves by diving deep into this present moment. So here's what I want to tell you. Everyone has their own creation, right? And each of us truly, anyone who is present here, can indeed cross paths with one another, but the creation itself will not be a shared one. This means that even when our paths cross here, and seeing each other within this particular spectrum of our perception, we still do not create a collective creation. And that's why the methodology is so important, and why we talk about full realization, like about something that is beyond everything conceptual, beyond any world of forms, right? That is what is in the unmanifested, that is, beyond the entire manifested world. Regarding how one might gain access to that, yes, and why, in ancient times, they presented such an intriguing analogy, an illustration. This was referred to as the Guru's cauldron. Perhaps you've heard of it, the Guru's cauldron, right? Where, let's say, these are now bubbles, where bubbles are boiling, moving back home towards the source of life. Well, we'll even draw a cauldron here, as if a fire is burning here. This is for those who have already decided to go home and have started to gravitate towards it, right? To move towards this movement, to move towards the source, to this oasis. And so here you have individuals who are part of a team, for instance, and each one of them possesses their own unique creation. Moving along this path according to a particular methodology, right? Through service and team service, new connections start to form. So, what exactly am I referring to? That if we go out one by one, there's this opinion that one can achieve full realization alone, although in reality it's just, pure consciousness and an enlightened mind. It's not say about full realization. Well, more precisely it says, but we will now understand how this functions. When a new creation is formed, like some sort of a field, we are actually already inside this field. Yes, inside this living space. And when there is a common goal, for instance, a team goal, right? A unified goal, and this goal is very profound, like the exit from all illusions, the exit from the all world of forms, and unification happens on this basis, then in this way, the creation becomes shared, and people, well, let's say the team, begin to experience themselves as an extension of each other. That is, they increasingly become one consciousness, right? That is to feel each other as, well, as oneself. And this is called mutual inclusion. And if we're discussing the principles known as the three main jewels that Buddha mentioned as the teacher, the team, and the knowledge, then where exactly is the teacher in all of this? And if the team is formed based on the principle that in every creation a teacher has manifested, in each of the creations there is indeed a teacher. As they say, when the student's ready, the teacher comes. In reality, the teacher's consciousness is already beyond all of this, right? It's in the depth, let's call it. Well, it can be depth or height, whichever is more convenient. Let's draw here that this is where the teacher is. What does that mean? Well, we simply perceive it in our own, let's say, creation as a form, yes, a certain form. But this form has already fully realized and is deeply dissolved in the infinite ocean of consciousness. And the teacher's only task is to simply transmit this life energy, to everyone, in whose creation it is manifested. If everyone within this creation shares the same goal and contributes to the formation of this collective field, then it allows for a much greater boiling within this guru's cauldron. These little bubbles, yes, become increasingly larger, and accordingly they are released. Into steam, yes, they completely transform into steam. But there is yet another powerful metaphor that originates from the East. It is often compared to the formation of such an environment, yes, like a kind of bow, let's call it. I'm not exactly the best artist, am I? Through this interaction, this extremely close team service, the bowstring is drawn not just to come out from the mechanism of corrections and not simply to go beyond the matrix, but rather to immerse yourself deeply into the absolute. And in this way, according to the same principle, our ancestors, they were the ones who formed this very path, and it was called by different names. It was called Belovodje, Shambhala, and various other names like El Dorado. Yes, it was called in other places. This means people created structures or groups that could ascend to a higher level of consciousness. Therefore, only by uniting with each other in this common creation can we go deep into the space we are talking about, that is, beyond of everything. And for this, you need a concept that takes you beyond all these concepts, essentially living knowledge. That is, all these three main jewels that I will speak about. That is, the team, the teacher, and the knowledge are the very foundation and basis for complete realization. Well, perhaps I've tried a little to answer the question about the importance of both the teacher and the importance of moving forward. Because in reality, falling asleep happens very quickly for those who are outside the presence of people from whom you can catch this fire, right? Why is the environment important? In fact, the field is so strong, it works powerfully, and the field is formed. You know, if you add a fresh cucumber to a pickle jar, and it will quickly become pickled too. It's the same principle. All social units are formed, right? Each one has its own energy. And that's why, in order to go deeper into awakening, it's very important to be in an environment of like-minded people. It is important that the like with the energy of consciousness keeps flowing constantly. So there was someone who had already completed this path, achieving full realization. Interacting with the space through service is exactly what Sergey was discussing yesterday, right? He was stating that the primary point is what we learn to interact with. The first thing is our body. Well, that is, according to the methodology, what we encounter. If we go into, well, for example, into yoga, right, into the 8-limbed system, it immediately says yama niyama. Or in orthodoxy, it's said that first you need to fulfill the 10 commandments, well, and in every culture or religion, in order to even enter the spiritual sphere, right, to go deeper into it and really get to know the ultimate truth, you need to master this the basic foundations. There. Further on, there is interaction with your own space. So we start taking responsibility for our world where we live. Primarily, it's our body. So, through the body, through breathing, through certain physical practices, right, that allow us to feel this body more and more. Through working with attention, working with the mind, we begin to increasingly master our own space for which we are responsible. And our psycho-emotional state is in the same way, right? And after that comes interaction, that is through service and the fulfillment of certain tasks so that these changes can begin. There, question, do all these bubbles come out at once, or is it a matter of luck? Well, look, let's approach it from this angle. In reality, we are all just tiny bubbles, every single one of us, even those who don't think of themselves as bubbles, who don't believe they are on any journey, or are too busy to even consider such ideas. He even might be an atheist, for example, right? But he is also a bubble, and eventually he will come to a boil. But if he doesn't have the specific conditions set for someone to remind him that he is, in fact, much more than he perceives himself to be, right? More than just a roll, that's it. So this bubble won't surface in this life, right? And perhaps not in the next one either. There you go. Therefore, for this guru's cauldron to be created, certain conditions are needed. Well, just so you understand, if we're speaking about this metaphor, right, the guru's cauldron, in Hinduism, it is said that the teacher gives 3% at each specific level of consciousness. So awakening is just the very beginning, right? When a person enters pure perception, when he sees that he is not just mind and body, that he sees the world is his extension, that separateness disappears. When a person starts to see and feel the source more, realizing that he is the cause of all that is happening, that's the very first step, right? After that comes pure consciousness and further. There you go. Well, if we are speaking about the bubbles, such a bubble will, let's say, comes to a boil faster, right? Meaning it's already starting to wake up and becomes awakened, and we see people like that now. But to truly dive on the much deeper levels of consciousness, you truly need someone to help illuminate and then remove those selfish aspects of your ego. Because essentially, what separates us from this source is this big shell made of ideas and of our ego. So, anything else? Okay, please explain, what does it mean? A fully realized teacher? Well, a very good question. But if we talk about what is full realization in general, it's simply that the concepts of awakening and enlightenment have become quite blurred recently. And by the way, it is written in the Bhagavad Gita that the time will come. In the Kali Yuga, yes, that it will be impossible to completely escape the mechanism of correction through meditation and practices. Well, actually, the Krishnaists adhere to this. There. However, it is also written that a time will come when there will be many false gurus, right? That is, there will be a Satya Yuga, that is, let's say, a period of enlightenment, a period of possible awakening, which is just now dawning. However, simultaneously, there will also be numerous distracting elements which will precisely is not about an exit from everything, from the world of forms, right? But it speaks about certain hierarchical light-related levels, which are still an incomplete realization. Full realization is when you merge into the infinite living ocean of consciousness, experiencing unity with the world. Although before that, there are more, well, certain steps, there is also cosmic consciousness after the pure perception of entry. Yes, that's already, well, a completely different perception of the cosmos, of those energies, those spaces, and those resonances you see that occur there. Further, there is divine and unified perception beyond the unified level of consciousness when you become one, I and the Father. One with this source, right? Once you've opened it up within yourself, that's when the most interesting begins, as our teacher says, there. So, we very often mistake the stereotype of this enlightenment itself for true reality, even though in is not there yet. Complete realization definitely exists far beyond all of this. But again, this is all conceptual and it's not so simple to talk about. But we can say that, for instance, in our specific situation, yes, according to the methodology, where the teacher selects an individual consonance for each student during this course, meaning the most subtle concept that, so to speak, enters into resonance with our energy system. It's taken from beyond the world of forms, the vibration our soul resonates with. And after that, this consonance is then transferred to the individual, or rather, the carrier from whom it was originally taken. It shifts from its initial frequency to the frequency of the person who then begins to learn and interact with this, let's call it, energetic vibration, or a concept that leads beyond all concepts. They start to interact through meditation. And once this experience with this energy provided by the teacher emerges, the experience of sensory perception beyond all boundaries manifests. This is the experience of such profound, boundless vastness of this very energy, of what we inherently are, this fundamental essence. Thus, the experience of this pure essence, it is beyond all words, indeed. So how do you combine spirituality and matter? How do you not get lost in ego? A good question. Actually, there's this perception that there is supposedly some kind of separation between spirituality and the material world, and that's it. You will have to work with the ego. It's a certain kind of labor, because you will need to transform it and align it with this path. This is exactly where we began from, the topic of making a firm decision. If I truly want to awaken, if I truly want to know this truth about what everyone talks, about what the great teachers and prophets spoke of, right? To know this divine essence, your own spark, to manifest this nature that is within, to know yourself, right? We already know so much about these samsaras. We spin from life to life. Well, for those who believe in it, right? Those who stick, let's say, to those concepts, right? The fact that it happens so many times and I still don't know it, live in some mental concepts and programs, and I want to break free from it. If there is such an unwavering inner desire that this is precisely what I desire, you see, and I prioritize it above all else. As stated in the Holy Scriptures, when God is put first, all else falls into place. If I do this and follow it, if I embark on this path, then your entire material life begins to harmonize with your genuine purpose, because that is why you are here. That's when everything else falls into alignment, this entire mechanism. It starts to help, because the space is wise, alive. We are in this infinite living substance, in this mother, well, let's call it our matrix, right? Which loves us. And it's solely focused on making us remember faster that we are in fact going home, that we are meant to be born, that our Father is waiting for us there, and yet we're still sitting in our mother's belly, contemplating how we might stay here just a little longer. That's it. So, to combine the spiritual with the material, you must choose the spiritual direction and prioritize it above all else. That is it. And then align the material aspects to this direction. You will achieve this very well. By the way, we can work with the term expanded consciousness because consciousness itself is always expanded. You see, it doesn't change. This consciousness, the absolute or Tao, is always whole and complete, isn't it? So there's the perception of consciousness, and it can vary. The spectrum of our perception can be quite different. If we are speaking of being in an expanded perception, it implies that if we are indeed within that expanded perception, our focus must certainly be in the body, since we are present here, aren't we? We consistently speak about the present moment. The depth of the present moment is both macroscopic and microscopic, infinitely deep and infinitely high. It all remains the present moment regardless. In other words, it's what's taking place right now. Not pondering in our thoughts in the past or the future, right? It's what's unfolding in the present. If you find yourself interesting, then it's what's happening now. Processes are happening in the body. There's always an infinite number of them. You must become interesting to yourself. All your attention is in the body. Then you learn to interact with the body, with this space. It's your body after all. If it receives enough love as you gesture and move, you begin to control your body more and more consciously. This is what awareness is. That's why you won't drift away. But you shouldn't be upset if you suddenly get lost in thought. You just return to the body again and begin to interact with it consciously.